Hello, Councillor Lewis.
Good morning.
How are you? Thanks. My name's Gareth. I'm substituting for Karen today, so I'm the Democratic officer supporting
All
the
right,
meeting.
okay. Yeah, so you're
So
down in Bridgend.
Yeah, I used to work in Bridgend actually.
All right.
I know Mark Galvin very well.
All right, okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's a good friend of Mark. So Mark obviously did my job for Bridgend.
Yeah. Well, we haven't seen a lot of people at the moment because people are still not back in civic offices. So we did have like a meet and greet last week, which was really good.
Yeah.
With a lot of the officers. So and Helen was there, Helen Picton was there.
Yeah,
so
good.
So because I've spoken to Helen a few times, but it is nice to sort of speak to somebody in person, you know. You can see that people are actually flesh and bones.
That's it. It's been a strange world with COVID and everything, and it's nice to get back to normality.
Yes, yeah.
So which ward do you represent up in Bridgend?
Garrow Valley.
Garrow Valley, yeah. I'm from Maesteg, so I'm one. I'm not sure the next one over, is it?
Yes,
yes, that's right.
Yeah. It used to be 4 wards, but with the boundary changes, we're now 1 ward, 3 councillors. So
right.
So we're back to 3 Labour councillors up here now. So
No.
yeah.
Morning all.
Morning.
I'm just going to pop to make myself a coffee, but I'll be back shortly.
Okay, no problem.
just hold on 1 second. Welcome to the joint committee meeting. It's a remote meeting. Can I ask people to keep themselves muted when they're not speaking? It just makes it easier for everyone else to hear. And if anyone is having any difficulties, with their being heard or being seen, can you just let Gareth know in the chat, or if you can get my attention, please just let me know. So thank you very much for everyone being here today. We've got a number of reports to get through, but do we have any apologies for absence, first of all?
It's Councillor Michael from Cardiff sends his apologies, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Did you get that, Gareth?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And then if we go to the minutes from the last meeting, are there any issues that anyone wanted to raise? Any corrections for that, or can we take those as being fine? I don't see anybody saying anything, so if we can agree those. So before we, any declarations of interest? Are there any? No. Okay, thank you. So, but before we go to the agenda item 4, I wanted to say congratulations to Jason Bale, who is Jason here? Can I? Yes, there he is. Hi, yes, Jason. Congratulations, Jason.
Thank you.
Because he's now what was his temporary post that I think you've had since January, haven't you?
Yeah.
Is now permanent. So that's enterprise and specialist services. So congratulations.
Thank you.
We're going to hear from you later anyway as well, aren't we, today?
Yeah.
So if we can move to the first report, which is agenda item 4, which is Audit Wales. And I think, Steve, you're dealing with that, are you? Steve Wyndham?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you. Thank you. I'll start by just giving you an update really in terms of the distribution of the papers. I think you've only very recently had the paper. So
yes, I should have mentioned that actually, Steve. We just received that this morning. So I'm not sure if people have had a chance to look at it. Did everyone receive that this morning about 9:40?
Yes, it would have been very recently. I think someone was, I'm not sure who, was trying to make a comment as well.
Yeah, it's me. Sorry, Chair. Can I? Obviously, the documents are sent this morning relate to agenda item 5, but it is agenda item 4 to begin with, Chair. And that's the audit inquiries to those charged with governance and management first, Chair. Okay, Steve.
Yes, this, strictly speaking, isn't my report as such. But I can sort of make some comment on it, and obviously officers from the Vale and the SRS can obviously add some additional comment as they see fit. But this is basically a request we make to management and those charged with governance, just to sort of provide us with assurances on certain fraud and governance matters to help inform our audit work. So it's just, in a sense, a bit of a belt and braces, you could argue, to some extent, just to ensure that we obtain the necessary assurance from yourselves and management that there aren't any sort of matters within that sort of governance and fraud arenas that we should be aware of, that we are not possibly aware of, that could shape our audit work and inform our audit opinion. Now, there are no such issues communicated within this return, so to speak. And I should add, this is something we ask for in all our audits, by the way. It's not just unique to the SRS. It is something that we need as part of our compliance with auditing standards to obtain that assurance. So, as I say, it's something we've requested, but it's not, the content within there isn't our content. It's been initiated by officers of the SRS and the Vale. So I'm not sure if it's appropriate for someone else to comment on that.
Sorry, I should have asked you, yes, Matt, to open with that report. So my apologies to you.
That's okay. It is an awkward one because it does sort of straddle the two teams. So as Steve said, those as part of their audit, they've approached us and asked us for assurance in these 3 areas. So matters in relation to fraud, matters in relation to laws and regulations, and matters in relation to related parties, and the body of the report gives a flavour of what they're approaching us around and what they're looking for. And then our responses to those are set out in appendices 1, 2 and 3 to the report. This isn't something I want to go through in any great detail. There are no concerns from our side on any of those areas in terms of responses we've given, and I believe Steve and team were happy with those assurances as well.
Thanks, Matt. So
I'm happy to take any questions on the content of the report.
Yeah, great. So are there any questions for Matt about this report? As you say, it's meeting what was requested, so it's quite straightforward in those terms. Does anybody have any questions? Steve, did you have a question? Or is that
it's not a question as such, Chair. I think the key question I would ask you as a joint committee to consider is whether you were satisfied that those responses align with your understanding of the SRS, because it's not just assurances you understand from management, it's assurances from those charged with governance, which is you, yes, as a collective body. So from my point of view, that's the key matter I would like to sort of take away from this meeting in regard to this agenda item.
Thank you, Steve. I mean, with that in mind, does anyone else have any comments? No, I mean, as I say, in terms of meeting what you've requested as Audit Wales, I know I'm relatively new to this, but for me, that there was nothing that struck me as anything to worry about. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Matt.
No, we can if we want to go through it in a little bit detail. Is just go through the grey tables in each of the 3 appendices, because those are basically the questions that we've posed and the response that we've given. So around in Appendix 1, around the international standards for auditing, we've asked around question 1 around the assessment of risk. We've asked in 2 processes to identify and respond to the risks of fraud. What arrangements in 3 are in place to report fraud, and how has management communicated expectations of ethical governance, and are we aware of any actual suspected fraud? So those are the responses that we put in 2021 to Audit Wales, and we've put the 21-2 ones in there, so there aren't any concerns that we have. Similarly, I don't know if people want to ask any questions around the fraud element of this at that point. No, and then we've done similar in matters in relation to laws and regulations. There's a bit of background at the start of the appendix, and then a similar approach where we've posed some questions about how we gain assurance that relevant laws and regulations have been complied with, any instances or suspicions of non-compliance, any potential litigations or claims, and any reports to regulatory bodies. And there are no concerns there. And then how does the joint committee gain assurance anywhere of non-compliance and any instances of non-compliance? And there are no issues in relation to any of those either. So that's about the legal issues. And then 3rd appendix is around matters in relation to related parties, And again, there's a series of 3 questions that of areas that we've examined around what we've disclosed to the auditor, what controls are in place to authorise, approve and account for related party transactions and relationships, and how does the joint committee exercise its overview of management activities in each of those areas. And again, there aren't any areas of concern coming through from that assessment.
Great. Does anyone want to comment on any of that? No, then I think we can note that. We're being asked to note that, aren't we, Gareth?
Yeah.
So should we go to the agenda item 5, Steve, which is your Audit Wales report, which, as we said earlier, I think people should have received about just before 9 this morning, well, about 9:40 this morning.
Yes, and it's often the case that some of our audit work can go quite late to the wire, so to speak. But there was an additional issue here in terms of clearance of the report, which sort of slowed things down a little bit. And then I was on leave yesterday, which sort of further sort of caused a delay, I guess, in terms of dealing with management's response to the report.
That's not allowed, Steve. Did you know you're not allowed to have leave?
I know that now. Thank you, Chair. But there's a number of factors at play. But anyway, the good news is that the audit is complete. There's nothing particularly contentious in the report, despite the fact what my preamble suggested there was some clearance issues. I think that was more of a wording matter more than anything else. I can see Matt nodding, which is good to see. But I'll go through the content of the report, probably in a little bit more detail than usual, given this late time tabling today.
Great.
But the good news is there's nothing particularly contentious in there. There are no sort of material adjustments. There's no significant issues arising. And we intend to issue an unqualified opinion. So it's not as if, I don't want to set alarm bells ringing by the fact it has been circulated late. That's very much not the case. But still, I'll go through the report anyway, just to give you a bit more assurance in regard to that. How would you do me to go through the report page by page? Would that be useful? Or just the main messages?
Well, I think the main message, I think it's good to have your reassurance that the lateness of it had nothing to do with, any difficulties with the report. But I think, do it as you feel would be best for us to comprehend.
Okay, thank you. I'll start on the contents page because that just gives you the high level message really. And this says basically we intend to issue an unqualified audit report on the accounts, which is the key message, I think, for you as a joint committee. Although there are some issues we need to report to you, which again is quite a normal sort of message really within these reports. It would be very unusual if there isn't anything for us to report to you, for example. So I'll just go through some of the content then of the report, but I'll try to keep it at an appropriate level, but not too high a level. Okay. As I say, we intend to issue an unqualified audit opinion, and there's no significant issues to report to you. Although I should add that what we need to do is do a final check on the final accounts prior to our certification. Although I know we've been looking at various versions of the revised accounts as we've been going through the audit process, so I don't anticipate anything significant arising from that. But it's just to sort of make you aware that it is one final stage for us as part of this audit process. I did say there's no significant issues to report, and there aren't any. For instance, there aren't any unadjusted misstatements within the financial accounts. All issues identified have been addressed, and there's been a small number of adjustments made to the final accounts, which I'll cover in a moment, which is covered in one of the appendices. We have raised a recommendation for next year. It doesn't affect this year's opinion whatsoever, and it's all about the process used for collating the related party transaction information within the accounts, and which relates also to the register of interest returns. But that's something we'll be working with the SRS and the Vale, of course, as part of over the next 12 months to sort of see what we can work upon between us in terms of improving those arrangements. But as I say, it's not a significant issue. If it was a significant issue, it would have an impact on this year's accounts. So that sort of preamble covers, I guess, the first 3 pages of the report. You know, as I say, unqualified opinion, and no significant issues are arising in regard to our audit work. I'll now move on to the 4 appendices, just to sort of give you that high level information, really, in terms of what each one of them is communicating. Appendix 1 covers the letter of representation. Now, this is a standard letter that we require from every audit we undertake. It's a template letter, so there's opportunity for the SRS and the Vale and yourselves to amend the wording as you see fit. But it's a letter that we will require, that the Auditor General that will require to support a certification of the accounts. Again, it just provides us with certain levels of comfort in regard to certain areas to inform that certification process. Appendix 2 is our proposed audit opinion, which again, just to make clear, is an unqualified audit opinion. It's a lot of content, isn't it? Just to communicate, we're happy with the accounts, but again, it's driven by auditing standards, etc. So it's quite a long-winded sort of audit report in many ways. Appendix 3 covers some of the audit adjustments that we are making, that the SRS will be making in regard to the accounts. But these have been identified from our audit work. There's been other narrative and other sort of typographical errors that have been amended as well, but these are the 2 most significant adjustments that we're communicating to you. One relates to adding greater clarity to Note 25 in regard to the senior officer remuneration disclosures. And Note 9 is correcting quite a significant by value error, but it's a classification error only. It doesn't affect the bottom line. In fact, neither of these have a bottom line impact, so they don't affect or have any impact on the closing position of the SRS. They're very much narrative and classification types of issues. And Appendix 4 finally is where we come to this recommendation, and this relates to the process really that's been adopted by the SRS, and we have a view that more can be done, if you like, to sort of identify whether the related party transaction note is fully complete and accurate, and by that, underpinning this is the register of interest disclosures that the various members make from the 3 constituent bodies. Now, this is all about compliance with the CIPFA code, and it's about the SRS and the Vale obtaining assurance themselves that compliance with the code is being met, and then to provide that assurance to us as auditors that is being met as part of the process obtained to sort of collate those related parties, so register of interest and the related parties note. We are content there's no issues on this year's accounts, largely because we have got quite a high level of assurance anyway, but we just feel there's more that can be done. And we also draw assurance from the fact that the SRS doesn't really engage in a great deal of contracting and procurement with third-party bodies, so the risk of this being compromised, so to speak, is low. But it's just a means of sort of further development and working with the SRS and the Vale going forward to sort of further tighten this up. That's what this recommendation relates to, as opposed to any huge concerns, I guess, in regard to this area. As I said, I've gone through the report as how I felt is an appropriate level of detail, covering the key messages, but very, very aware of the fact that you've only just had this report and there may be some questions or some queries from yourself. So I'd be very happy to sort of try to address them as best I can.
Well, thanks for that, Steve. So actually, my question was going to be about on the recommendations that. So it's a bit like an end of year report in terms of if someone's done very well, you're looking for something to improve. So have you picked this in particular because it's not based on anything that that the SRS has missed or done incorrectly? Because you've put it as a high priority as well. That's the other question I was going to ask you. Do you expect that to be different next year? And obviously, what would that look like?
Well, the reason it's a high priority, first of all, is that one of the early paragraphs within our report refers to materiality. And I'll draw your attention to the particular paragraph now, actually, just so I'm clear and you were clear. Yeah, paragraph 3 and 4 of the report talk about materiality levels, and we set materiality at £260,000 in terms of financial terms. There's also some qualitative areas as well where we assess a lower level of materiality, and for one of those areas is for related party transactions, and that's because it's an area that is material by nature, I guess, in terms of the wider public and what these accounts mean. But the risk of fraud or any sort of not that we think there's any heightened fraud here. This is standard practice, if you know what I mean, across all audited public sector bodies in particular. So that's why it's a high priority, because it sits within an area which we attach a high level of importance to.
Yeah, understood.
So that's the reasoning for that. And in terms of next year, I think this is all about. It's probably more about sort of pulling together and having more of a coordinated approach, which sort of aligns across all 3 constituent bodies, because we identified there were slightly different practices across each of the Cardiff Council and the Vale, and it's making sure that they each comply with the CIPFA code, because the CIPFA code, which is the rules of the game here, I guess, in terms of what's disclosed, require interests being disclosed in regard to any close family members, for example. And we found that there was different sort of arrangements or we weren't getting the same level of assurance, if you like, across each 3 councils bodies, or the members from each 3 council bodies in regard to that. So it's just seeing what can be done, if you like, to sort of tighten that process up in regard to the SRS. Yeah. Yes. So that's the key thing, but I think it's a bit of discussion that's going to be required to sort of tighten that up, if you like, and to further sort of flesh that out in terms of what exactly is required.
Brilliant. Yeah. Matt, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to say first off, apologies that the papers have been late. And when you're talking about things that need to improve for next year, that is one of them, that we actually give you the opportunity to properly read the papers in advance. We did unfortunately have this one area that we weren't able to easily reconcile between the 2 of us towards the close of the audit. And on the declaration of interest, there's a difference in the members' code of practice, which all 3 authorities very clearly comply with, and the extra step that's required in the accounting code of practice. So I know when we were speaking to our monitoring officer early in the week, that we were both talking code, and our monitoring officer was talking the members' code, we were talking the local authority code. So it is a relatively complicated area. But it is more challenging because of the nature of the shared service and the fact that we have 3 slightly different arrangements. But it's a small issue, and it's one that we will review and put a process in place for next year. And it is quite straightforward to address. And importantly, for the audit and sign off of the audit this year, whilst we didn't have all of that in place at the start of the audit, those assurances were provided during the course of the audit, and everything was as it should have been.
Great, thank you, Matt. Do any other members have any questions or comments at this stage? Well, thank you very much, Steve and Matt, for that. So can we note that as well? And then agenda item, are we at 6 or 7 now?
We need to stay on this item.
Oh, for you?
Yes, yeah. We just need to go back to the recommendations in the report. This was an appendix to the report. So as Steve has outlined, the external audit of the accounts is all but completed, just needs to do some final checking. On our part, there have been those presentational changes to the accounts that Steve's just mentioned. So we've had some presentational issues. So we've agreed to present the closing positions from the left-hand side of the tables in prior years compared to how shown on the right. So we've made some presentational changes. There were some transposition errors in the report. So on page 14 of the accounts, the expenditure funding analysis, there was a minor error that's been corrected. Similarly, in the pensions items on page 35 and the pensions reserve table, and we needed to update related party income details as well in page 37. We've added a sentence on exit packages in page 50, and also there's some additional narrative on the remuneration table as well. And on top of that, we've picked up the 2 issues that Steve has highlighted in his ISA 260 report as well. So I think the main takeaway from us is that we'll need to just make sure that when we're doing the final proofreading of our report, that we go over those final numbers a bit more diligently than we've perhaps done this year, because I wouldn't expect those sort of transpositional errors to come through, and ideally we don't want the auditor pointing them out to us either. But
sorry, Matt, you mean on the narrative, the value
Steve said, there's no changes at all to the bottom line and the main statements in the accounts, but there are a couple of minor transpositional issues and presentational issues in the disclosure notes. So from the accounts that were presented earlier in the summer, no changes. So the bottom line outturn position of 363k underspend is unchanged. So I'm just, because I've got multiple bits of paper in front of me now, I'm just going back to the recommendations, so that we are asking that the final statement of accounts as attached are approved, that the letter of representation to Audit Wales be noted and agreed and signed by the chair of the committee, that the report of the appointed auditor on the audit of the shared regulatory services is noted, and that the shared regulatory services governance statement is also signed and approved by chair of the committee, chair of the shared regulatory management board, and the head of the regulatory shared regulatory service.
So committee, can we agree those recommendations?
Give her a seconder as well, Chair. A seconder, please.
Can I have a seconder, please?
Seconded.
Did you get that, Gareth?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. So thank you, Matt and Steve, for that. So now we can move on to agenda item 6, which is our overview and update of our the shared regulatory services. I think, Helen, you're going to lead on this, aren't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning to everyone. So this is an overview and update report, and the purpose of it is to take a look back over Q1, and we may have crept a little bit into Q2, but not a great deal, to look at what the service has been delivering since we last met. So you'll be familiar with the format of the SRS business plan that was presented at the AGM in June. And that set out how we deliver services under these themed areas, these 5 strategic themes. And you'll see a little bit later on in the report that we'll return to those to highlight some of the areas of work that we've been involved in recently. So if I can take you to section 2 in the report, we will start by looking at some human resources matters, and it's all thanks to our staff that we're able to provide our services, and I think it's only right that we start by focusing in on some staffing matters. So we normally give an update on sickness absence, and I've set that out in a table. Again, I've not looked back simply at last year by way of comparison. I've taken it back a year further. So we're looking at the previous 2 years for Q1 to make those comparisons, because of course we've had some quite unusual years, I think we can say, throughout COVID. We are running an absence rate which is higher, unfortunately, than we've seen in the last 2 years in the same Q1 period. And we're now looking at a 3.38 days lost per full-time equivalent member of staff. Drilling into that, as you can see from the table, the majority of that is being driven by long-term absence, and unfortunately we have had a number of long-term absences, which I touched on in our last meeting. So hopefully some of those members of staff are now returning to work. We don't have any concerns or discernible trends in terms of the short-term absence figures. In 2.2, some sad news for you. We have suffered, unfortunately, during Q1, the loss of 2 members of staff. They're both highly regarded environmental health professionals, and you can imagine that this has really impacted the service, both on a professional and very much a personal level as well. So I just wanted to share that sad news with you. 2.3, recruitment and retention, and apologies, I'm conscious that I talk about this a lot. It continues to be challenging, and this isn't an issue that is exclusively a problem or a challenge for SRS. This is right across regulatory services in Wales and beyond. So we continue to try to make inroads in terms of recruitment and retention. And again, I've highlighted the drivers behind this, the ageing workforce, the limited pool of suitably qualified staff from which to recruit from. So we're very much keen to see the launch of the regulatory apprenticeship, and I can report that that work through Welsh Government is progressing, and a steering group is now being assembled so that framework can be developed as quickly as possible, and we really look forward to that developing. Building on the recruitment and retention piece, in 2.4 I mention a SRS staff survey that we've undertaken, and that ran for 3 weeks during August. It had 2 main themes. The first of those was really a temperature check, a wellbeing check, to see how staff were doing after working through some pretty unusual times. The last time we did this survey was back at the very start of 2020, and obviously an awful lot has changed since then. And the second theme, no surprise, is looking at that recruitment and retention, and really asking staff for their views, their opinions on how can we make SRS as welcoming and as attractive a service as possible to work for. And we've had around about a 2/3 response rate, which is really pleasing, and some really helpful constructive comments. So we're now dissecting those comments that we've received and starting to put together in the coming weeks some plans for hopefully some quick wins and some longer term work through some focus groups. 2.5, again, another element, I suppose, in our desire to crack this recruitment and retention problem that we've experienced. And this is to report that we've actually employed on a permanent basis into establishment roles some more of the environmental health students that we recruited on an agency basis during the COVID pandemic, and they're now actually embedded into the service in areas such as food, housing and licensing enforcement. So that is a really welcome development. And 2.6 is just to say that as in previous years, we are assisting with some match funding to help members of staff undertake additional qualifications at master's level. So I'm turning now to section 2.7, and I'm looking at Matt because I'm now going to hopefully a seamless transition over to Matt to pick up the financial position for Q1, which is Appendix 1 in this report. So over to you, Matt.
Yeah, so just a brief update on the finances, and certainly the service is experiencing some of the financial pressures that we're seeing across the rest of the public sector, certainly around energy charges, general inflation, price rises, cost of living, staffing pressures, etc. The biggest impact of all of those on the service at the moment is the pay award offer that's currently on the table but not yet agreed. Most authorities sort of provided for about 3% uplift in pay in their budget setting for 22/3, but the pay award that's currently on offer is the equivalent of 6 to 7%. So that's put pressure on the shared service, and similarly we have some operational costs around the seizure of 80 horses during the period that we're allowing 100k additional cost. 50k of that's been incurred already. There's some outstanding vets fees, so there's a hope that we will come a little bit inside of that, but at the moment there's a forecast overspend of 211k across the shared elements of the service. The full detail is included in the following paragraphs of the report, and happy to answer any questions on that if members have any.
Are there any questions on that specifically from members? I mean, Helen, do you want to? I mean, you've touched on some of the reasons for this already. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, Chair, Matt has covered that, and I think it's covered in 2.7 in the report. Yeah. You know, in line with all other services in councils across Wales, we are facing a pay award that I don't think any of us could ever have anticipated. And obviously the 2% has been projected, and we're facing a gap. There are some operational costs which Matt highlighted in relation to a seizure, unfortunately, of some further horses back in July. I'm happy to report that work is progressing well, and we don't envisage that we would need to use the full amount of what has been set aside for that work, because progress is being made in taking that matter forward.
Thank you. So Helen, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I should apologise. In my haste to hand over to Matt, I forgot to ask members if there are any questions on the human resources piece that we covered at the start of the report. Happy to take those now if there are. No,
I think you're very thorough, Helen.
Okay, so if we move down to performance monitoring, and this is where we're going to get the coloured charts out shortly to share with you. I would just drop down to 2.9 before we do that. And again, it's just to remind members that although we are reporting on the traditional performance metrics in relation to food, we are still following and will continue for some time to follow the FSA Local Authority Recovery Plan, which is set out for you in figure 1 in the report. Christina is going to actually look at the detail of our performance shortly to work through the charts. But I just wanted to flag that with you, that we're looking at those performance figures through the lens of us working along this FSA Local Authority Recovery Plan. Chris will share exactly where we are at the end of Q1, but I wanted to raise this with you so that you are aware that the work we're doing currently in Q2, while we're progressing well with it, it is challenging because the nature of the premises that we're going into now, the ones I've outlined in 2.9, we are finding difficulties. And of course, when we find food hygiene difficulties, we have to deal with them. And that ultimately involves work which could end up in formal action being taken. So it is an additional challenge for the service in actually dealing with what we're finding in some of those premises. So hopefully I've set the scene now for Christina, and I think with Jason's help, we're going to share the performance tables so that we can all take a look through those.
Thanks, Helen, and yeah, good morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm calling for a little bit of help from my friend Jason, who's going to share the screen for us, so you can see exactly what it is that we're talking about. And conscious, of course, that we are, we're talking about results at the end of Q1 here, and of course we've moved on significantly as we're nearly at the end of Q2. But as Helen rightly points out, this is a bit of a strange time for us in terms of reporting on performance, because of course we have the normal programme which comes with food, but at the moment we're working towards the FSA recovery plan. So the figures that you see in front of you, we obviously have to bear in mind that we're working towards that recovery plan, not our normal programme. So I'll do my best to explain, but of course any questions, feel free to ask or stop me. So the figures that you have in front of you there relate to category A and category B premises. So these are our higher risk establishments, the category A requiring an inspection once every 6 months, category B once every 12 months. So at the last joint committee, we separated these out for you because of the recovery plan and for you to have the full detail as to where we are. But this is my favourite colour. We're all green on category A's and B's to performance, and again in line with the recovery plan. Moving on to the next one, relates to category C premises. So category C premises require an inspection at a frequency of once every 18 months. So last quarter, we weren't focusing on category C rated premises, again, because that's where the recovery plan was. However, the next milestone is the end of this month, where we will have been required to have completed our non-broadly compliant Cs. Now, when we talk about broadly compliance, we talk about the food hygiene rating scheme, and we class broadly compliance as having 3 stars or above, so 3 to 5. So non-broadly compliance, we're looking at those for the 2 1s and 0 premises, so our lower rating premises, and we will have had to have completed all of those by the end of this month, so in a couple of days' time. Very much on target, I'm told. We've been chasing the team. There are a couple of premises where access has been an issue, but overall I'm confident that we will meet that next milestone. But I do want to draw your attention on this to the number of inspections due. So you'll see in the comments here, yes, we're on red, but that's because of where we've been placing our priority. But the number of due premises in category C, this is problematic for us. And I'll go on to that a little bit more in my presentation to you later for the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan. But you'll also see from the comments that we've been really working hard to get those milestones completed. So just flagging this, and I'll talk more later on category C rated premises. So moving on to new inspections, again staying with food hygiene. If you could just see there that we are on red for new businesses, but again the priority has been in terms of the milestones. But you'll see in the comments there for the new businesses how many have actually been completed by the team and how much headway we've made in terms of completing those inspections. So although the colour coding is red, it is pleasing to see that the inroad we're making in terms of those premises that are needing to be completed. In terms of the next slide, this is broadly compliant food premises. So again, I've touched on broadly compliant. Those 3-star and above is what we call broadly compliant. We're all green here, demonstrating that we've got a good standard of compliance. But even though this is a performance indicator for us, it's really a performance indicator for the businesses, because we can't control what we find when we're out there. Now, we anticipate that as time goes on and we start reaching some of those premises, the intelligence, the evidence that we're seeing at the moment is that standards have deteriorated during COVID time. And so we are anticipating that this will get lower as we go along, as we are finding lots of non-compliances. So the next one for me to report on is the trading standards inspections. And again, this is the high risk. Again, this was last quarter. So there were some outstanding inspections. And I am advised this morning that all bar one have now been completed in terms of where we should be. So you'll note a couple of reds there, but as I say, that they have now been completed, and I believe that there were some access issues in terms of those visits for those premises. And the final one in terms of trading standards there are new businesses. Now, again, this does look quite low. And the text there around the performance does talk about staffing pressures and so on. But I want to highlight there is another operational activity that does affect this performance, in that our food hygiene officers are trained to undertake food standards inspections on a new business. So where our food hygiene inspections have been affected, this PI is also affected, because in effect, they go out and do 2 for the price of 1. So they do a hygiene inspection, and at the same time, they do a food standards inspection. So where our food hygiene officers perhaps haven't got to some of those premises, these are also affecting this performance indicator. So where performance is improved and we go back to a higher level, we anticipate that the trading standards performance indicator for new businesses will also go up at the same time. So I'm going to pause just there before I pass to Will in terms of his performance area, conscious that I've given you lots of information there about performance. As I said, we do have the Food Law Enforcement Service plan come in for the next report, which I'll present to you and give you some more context in some of the work that we do. But I wondered if there are any queries or questions in relation to the food performance that I've just presented to you.
No, again, it's been that's been, you've given us quite a bit of detail. Does anybody have any particular questions on this part? When you give your report, Chris, there might be, more questions then. But it is, we are where we are, aren't we, really? So if there aren't any questions at this stage, why don't you continue, and then we can maybe, if there are questions, when you give your report, Chris.
Lovely, great. Okay, so that's the end of my bit. I'm again handing over now to Will for Will's performance area, and he is best placed to present that to you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chair. So this first performance indicator refers to the domestic noise and air complaints responded to within 3 days, and our target here across the service is 90%. So first up, across the service, pleasing to see that we exceeded that target, and we're green overall. You'll see that we were in the amber category in Bridgend and the Vale, but if you actually look at the numbers, we're talking about a very small number of complaints that fell outside that target. And what I would say across my neighbourhood services teams, the ones that concentrate on private sector housing and noise pollution, we have got a number of vacancies. One of our team managers left to take up a post in another authority, and we've had 2 senior officers leave those areas, partly moving within SRS, which has obviously helped some of our other performance indicators. But those vacancies have now been filled, thankfully. But there may be a knock-on effect into Q2 as well, because Q1 is busy, but Q2 is usually our peak period for noise and air complaints. So we may see a carryover of this into Q2 when we come back to report on that. But hopefully, moving forward with a full complement of staff, I think we're set fair to meet these targets. And despite the vacancies, we've managed to exceed the target overall. Moving on, Jason, to the next one, if you may. So this reflects, again, a response time target for commercial and industrial noise and air complaints. And we've set this as a more challenging target because it's 1 working day. And the reason we've done that historically is because often they can give rise to larger numbers of complaints. The target there is 75%, and you'll see across the service, this target is in the amber category. Again, we're not talking huge numbers of complaints that have not been answered within that time frame. And again, it does go back to some vacancies that we've had in the service. So given where we are with recruitment, I'm happy to sort of say to members that those figures will hopefully improve going through the following quarters. If you want to move on, Jason. So this is an indicator that we have for the response times for noise alarm complaints, either from car alarms or property alarms. And we aim to try and get there within 1 working day again, and they're all green, so that's pleasing. A lot of these happen just outside normal working hours, or they could be responded to by officers in the day. Moving forward then, Jason, the licensing, I'm not going to dwell on. We have statutory targets across the 3 authorities that we serve in relation to applications and received and determined, and that's set down by statute. And through the hard work of the licensing administration teams and officers who sort of populate that part of the SRS, they're all green, and I'm happy to report that all our statutory targets in relation to applications have been met. So really, that's a quick run through the neighbourhood services side. Happy to take any question.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for that. So are there any questions on this part of the report? You're all astounding members, so nobody's throwing questions at you. No, so thank you for that. So thanks for that, Will. So should we zip back to you, Helen?
It is back to me. It's like Wimbledon, isn't it? Back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to pick up, Chair, the next part of the report from 2.10 onwards. And this is where we take a look back over the quarter at the work we've been doing under those strategic themes. So the first of those is supporting public health, and I think this section is self-explanatory. It just gives again an indication of where we are in terms of that wider health protection role that SRS performs. I've given a little bit of narrative on where we are in terms of COVID related work, and of course that is very much stepped back now in line with the current Welsh Government position. We are continuing to work with the high risk settings, care homes, etc., to ensure that they have the support that they need. And all the while, as we've highlighted before, we are very much hoping that we don't see a new variant and a real sort of return to some of the darker days during the autumn and the winter. Now, I think we've probably all seen press reports in the last few days that indicate that numbers are starting to tick up. So we're keeping a very, very close eye on that and hope that it doesn't turn into something major as we've had to do previously, but we're keeping a very, very close eye on that. And we have the ability to obviously mobilise staff back into those roles if that proves necessary, and we very much hope that it doesn't. 2.13 onwards, again, just to reinforce for members that how varied the SRS role is in this public health arena. We've all read about the monkeypox outbreak, and just some information there was correct at the time of writing in terms of the figures that are included, but just to give a feel for the role of SRS with regard to different communicable diseases. Clearly, COVID has taken priority over recent times, but there are others which hopefully we're nimble enough to be able to respond to. And 2.16 outlines some of the powers that local authorities have with regard to some of those communicable diseases. So that brings us on nicely to the next two sections, which introduce two statutory plans for you, Communicable Disease Plan and the Port Health Plan, both for 22-23. So I did say it was like Wimbledon. I'm going to pass you now back to Christina, and she's just going to take you through those few sections.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And again, I'm not proposing to go into these plans in any detail. Conscious that this joint committee is quite heavy with my service plans as well. So the communicable disease plan is one that we put to you every year, and really what that it's about is to explain to you how we fulfil our duties in terms of protecting public health, in investigating outbreaks of communicable disease. So you've had that within your pack. Obviously, COVID-19 forms part of that CD type work, and interestingly, since the pandemic, some of our other outbreaks are very much the team is a lot busier in terms of other investigations and so on. So likewise, the Port Health Plan is another service plan contained in Appendix 4, there for information for you as to how we carry out our duties. I wasn't planning on going into any detail on them, really just being here to take any questions if there was any on those two service plans. They are quite hefty reads, not quite as much as the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan. So again, for me to go through that in any detail or page by page would take out an inordinate amount of time. So any queries, happy to take those now from you.
So again, it's very thorough. So are there any particular questions on that part? I suppose a general question. I guess to all of you, in terms of, do you in the parts that you've covered, Christine, and the things that we'll be hearing about later. Do you anticipate with the cost of living crisis that shortcuts are going to be made with fridges going off and whatever in shops? So are you anticipating kind of a rise in in that particular part of the work?
Very much so, and you've just highlighted one area, you know, turning those fridges off, which I was going to touch on as part of my presentation. That is a real, you know, in terms of food and temperature control of food, that's a real worry for us. If businesses are going to be forced to go down that route in terms of trying to save money in that way, the consequence of having food out of temperature control obviously poses serious risk to the consumer. So we are receiving a little bit of intelligence to suggest that might be a way of businesses trying to save some money, because of course we're anticipating that people will be, you know, in desperate times. Consumers may not have the money to go out and eat and so on, you know, eat out rather than eating at home. So that is really concerning for us. And likewise, from a health and safety perspective as well, the maintenance of the equipment. Will they have the money to be able to do so? And that's the type of areas where, you know, things go by the wayside because of the lack of funds. And of course, you'll have the people who will take advantage of the lack of money. So, you know, in terms of the food chain and safe food being provided and so on. So we're very much heightened at the moment in terms of what we could face. And as the autumn and winter comes into being, then of course officers need to be very aware of some of the pressures that our businesses will be under. So we are anticipating a rise in enforcement. Certainly since being out there carrying out our normal duties, you know, as a result of the pandemic, we are finding a lot more non-compliances, not having us out there, you know, and being there regularly. I think businesses have perhaps stepped away from the norm, and so I think we need to be ready that the enforcement work will have an incline now. Obviously, I'm just talking from my specific area, and I'm sure Jason and Will have their own examples and views, but certainly we need to be ready for further enforcement work.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Helen, back to you. Is it back to you?
Thanks, Chair. What I'm going to do now is actually pass over to Will for the next section on Homes for Ukraine.
Yes.
And then immediately after Will, Jason will pick up the animal health and welfare section.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, is my camera on or is it gone off? It's on, right, okay. So by way of a very brief update, members will be aware SRS has been assisting the three authorities in the Homes for Ukraine scheme. In doing that, we've dedicated a team of officers made up of some of our housing officer staff, housing enforcement officer staff, some recent graduates from environmental health, and they've been managed by one of our team leaders called Helen Penbridge, who works across Bridgend and the Vale. And they've been servicing the demand as part of the Homes for Ukraine scheme for local authorities to make visits to check on the properties that refugees are being homed in by members of the public. There are a lot of different schemes that have come into being. The Welsh Government have had a super sponsor scheme. There have been family schemes where you can bring in refugees who you're related to. But this relates mainly to the Homes for Ukraine scheme, where people have volunteered to give up their properties for 6 months. A room in their properties to host a family or individual refugees. So the work of the team has been really to visit those properties. In the main, certainly across Cardiff and the Vale, it's to check on the basic health and safety standards in the property. And we've got a property check form that we've agreed with other authorities as well. We didn't want to be overzealous in our enforcement. We're not necessarily expecting the same standard as you would have in the private rented sector, but what we're looking at is basic health and safety standards, so they're not going to be at risk in those properties. So that's what we've been aiming for, and the vast majority of properties that we've come across have been very well appointed and perfectly acceptable. In Bridgend, the team has also helped that authority manage the DBS checks of sponsors. So that's really a system that's been put in place to ensure that the people who are coming forward are of good character. Again, 99.9% of the people who volunteer are doing it for the correct reasons, but obviously, we have to weed out any opportunist sponsors that have come forward for other reasons. So that's been quite a challenging piece of work, and we've done approximately 450 visits. The split has been around 250 in Cardiff, over 90 in the Vale, and just over 100 in Bridgend. Those schemes are coming towards the end of their 6-month period, and there has been a concern from Welsh Government and local authorities that all of those refugees then would need to be rehomed in alternative accommodation. But thankfully, the dropout rate is not as high as some may have anticipated, and it's along the lines of 25% of original sponsors who aren't able to commit to a further period. But that leaves 75% of those refugees remaining in those the accommodation they were placed in. The focus now is, however, turning to larger types of accommodation, and certainly the use of the private rented sector to home anyone who needs to be homed. And we'll be working with colleagues across the 3 authorities and their housing options team to assist in that process wherever we can. A note prior to come into the meeting, there was a media release reported on that one of the ministers has called for more volunteers to come forward because of the anticipated increase in numbers of refugees. And we'll have to see how the public respond to that. If they do respond in large numbers, then we could see the workload increasing again. But I think we're quite well placed to meet that demand if it happens. And obviously we'll step up and provide that assistance to the 3 authorities where needed. So it's a bit of a success story really from our side. We feel we've played our role in helping, but obviously there is a bigger challenge moving forward. And going back to your original question to Chris, Chair, I think one of the areas where we do feel that the cost of living increases that we're having, and potentially rises in interest rates, it may impact is the private rented sector and the pressure on homelessness in general. Obviously, if people can't afford their mortgages, if landlords can't afford to maintain properties, that all knocks on to the work that we have when we're dealing with, sometimes we're dealing with properties that are in a very poor condition anyway. So anything that adds on to that demand on our team could have a knock-on effect. So it is one of those areas certainly that would be impacted by the cost of living crisis, and something we need to plan for really. So happy to take any questions on that piece of work.
No, I mean, actually, the Homes for Ukraine is a good news story, and we should, be pleased with that. Yes, I think the difficulties about that scheme when it first started are probably sort of flattening out now, aren't they? So that is really good news. Yeah, the cost of living, and the problem is it does feel a bit doom and gloom, doesn't it? Because we've Helen, you've already talked about recruitment and the difficulties there, but that's not going to go away, is it? So it is something we have to plan for, and then there are budgets as well. So we've got all of this to look forward to. But thank you for that. Well, does anybody else have any questions, or should we move on to Jason? Is it Jason next?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
In your permanent role now, Jason.
It is, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So again, continuing a good news theme. Really, just the first thing we've highlighted here is the award that the Animal Health and Welfare team won in partnership with South Wales Police and the Fire and Rescue Service. which was the Police and Crime Commissioners Partnership Award for the South Wales Police Awards held back in April. So it relates back to the 2021 seizure of 240 horses and the welfare case that soon followed that. So just really wanted to highlight the work of the team and the ongoing work that they're doing. And as already highlighted, we've had to undertake another seizure already this financial year in terms of 80 odd horses that have been seized, and the case continues with that really. So just really demonstrating the effort and the work that the team do for that really. So it's nice that it was recognised in that award. The other issue really that we want to sort of highlight is the ongoing concerns of avian influenza. So throughout the last season, there were a number of cases in wild birds. Thankfully, and touch wood, we didn't have any sort of domesticated birds affected in the SRS region, but obviously the ongoing impacts on the wild birds sort of really raises the potential risk that, a premises could be impacted. And if that does occur, then obviously it's going to put a lot of pressure on ourselves and other teams to sort of work with APFA and DEFRA to control that, and Welsh Government really. So there is a mitigation strategy put together for wild birds in England and Wales that we've highlighted in that report. And just to highlight that, normally in the summer months, avian influenza, it disappears from the birds, but given the cases that we've had this year, it has stayed around. There have been sort of cases throughout the summer months, and we've been impacted in our areas at a couple of locations, mainly Cosmoston Lakes, the Knapp, and also Roath Park in Cardiff, basically. So concerns that this will continue as we really reach the peak of the season coming into the autumn and the winter months, really. So we just need to be vigilant on this, and sort of we'll get the communications as and when sort of cases in wild birds do be confirmed. And the ongoing work really around illegal dog breeding hasn't sort of slowed down. That we were getting a number of cases and reports of illegal breeding and welfare cases around that really. So just highlighting here of one where we seized 20 dogs that were reported to us. We had to seize them, enter a non-occupied property to take those dogs and get them to the appropriate veterinary care, and with our sort of rescue charity that we work with for that, and there are ongoing investigations for that case as we speak. And just one other area we wanted to highlight is around the keeping of primates as pets. We do get a number of complaints regarding this area of work. We actually had one last week that was investigated. So really, we're just showing here that, from our point of view, SRS and our animal welfare team, we really sort of support the RSPCA's campaign to try and stop the practice of keeping primates as pets, really because they aren't suitable for domesticated areas, really. We can't see how they can meet their needs are met. Mainly monkeys are kept, many monkeys, but other primates as well. But they're kept in isolation as individual animals. And as we know, primates are very sociable animals. So really, they need that interaction. They need this sort of group pack that they live in, really, so that they suffer from depression and other sort of anxiety issues, which is well known from the RSPCA, really. So I think the RSPCA has indicated that of all the cases they investigate, over 60% are always kept on their own, really. So, and it's not how they should be kept. So we're really supportive, really, of where the RSPCA wants us to go, hoping that a bill comes forward that only licensed zoological establishments should be where primates are kept. And we've worked with the RSPCA on a number of cases, as we said. So we're looking to really support that, and we do fully recognise that they aren't suitable companion animals in domesticated premises, really. So just wanted to highlight to the committee that's where the view we're taking with the RSPCA and supporting them fully on their campaign with that, really. And I think that's all for the animal welfare aspect of it.
So thank you for that, Jason, and congratulations on the award. That is excellent. I know there's been a prosecution, hasn't there? Is that on the horses? Was there a prosecution going to the magistrates' court?
Yeah. So it was that one there that there was a big prosecution case for that. There are some cases coming forward that we're taking forward, and there was a case last week for the seizure of the horses that we had as what we call Section 20 hearing. So those horses have been, officially awarded into our care from the magistrates, subject to an appeal process going forward as well.
And yes, the primate thing, I don't understand why that isn't legislated already, but there you go. So thank you for that. I'm conscious of the time, so it's 11:15. So Helen, should we? There don't seem to be any other questions. So should we go back to you?
Yes, nearly there now, Chair. So coming down to section 2.31, again, just carrying on this, the structure for the report under the heading Protecting the Vulnerable. Just an update there on some underage sales work and unfortunately some illegal sales to a 16-year-old volunteer of electronic cigarettes in retail premises. So investigations are ongoing there. And 2.32 clearly and under this heading, cost of living crisis, again, it really touches everything that we do. And it was to raise awareness, let Joint Committee know that the intelligence coming into the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit is seeing a real uptick, so real concerns in terms of the number of loan shark cases that have been reported, and that fear that people are really up against untold worry and suffering as a result of the cost of living crisis, and they are turning, unfortunately, to these illegitimate lenders. And I've taken the opportunity in 2.33 to highlight the contact details for the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit, because clearly there are people who out there who need help. So the more we can do to raise awareness, the better. I can see that Councillor Lewis has got her hand raised, Chair, so happy to take a question on that section.
Thanks, Helen. It's on the illegal money lending. As you know, we had, I helped to set up and run community pantries, and we had somebody from your team come in and give us a talk on illegal money lending. It went down really well, loads of brilliant information, and as a result, we're looking at putting, getting involved with credit union and bringing credit unions into our community pantries so people can get more information, they can save while they're already coming into us anyway, and hopefully to stop people going down the route of illegal money, lending. So thanks for that.
That's great feedback, Councillor, thank you very much, and fantastic work that you're doing there, linking in with credit unions and responsible sources of lending. That really is good news. So, Chair, there are no further questions on that. The last point I was going to raise in this report is 2.34, enforcement activity. And I can leave that, I'm sure, to members to take a look through rather than highlighting individual cases. But it's details of the prosecution cases that have concluded in court during Q1, only 8 for that quarter, but we are seeing a lot in the pipeline. So I think for the December meeting, we will have quite a few to present to you, but they cover the remit as usual, conditions in private rented sector, food hygiene, use by dates, it covers the range, so hopefully members can take a look, and any questions on those cases, more than happy to answer those outside of the meeting. So that is me done, I think, Chair, for the content of the report. And it's just to take you back to the recommendation, which is to consider, note and agree the contents of this report, which obviously includes those 2 statutory plans, the communicable disease and the port health plans.
Brilliant, thank you, Helen. That was as always very sort of thorough overview. So if there are no other questions, can we are we agreed that we can note that and Helen recommended.
Happy to move that, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. So if we move to our final report, so that's back to you, Christine, which is the food and the food law enforcement service. So can we ask you, Chris, to take us through that? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And I will be calling on Jason again to assist me with just sharing a couple of slides that Helen has asked me to put together for this. So we do this plan, it's a statutory plan that we do every year, but conscious of the some new members, I wanted to provide a little bit more explanation in terms of the food service and really give it some time as it is a high risk service area. So in terms of recommendations, it is really to approve the 22-23 Food and Feed Law Enforcement Plan and to authorise Helen to have the ability to make amendments should she need to. So you all have the FLESP, as we call it for short, in front of you. That was all part of the pack. It's quite a big read. It does provide a lot of detail. So I'm just going to take you through, generally talk to you about the service and how we do things, and of course take any questions should you have them. So why do we do this? We don't just do it just because to give you something to read. We have to do it. It's part of the Food Standards Agency Framework Agreement, and the FSA are in effect our regulators. So we have to do it to comply with that agreement. And of course, we do it in a response to that requirement to inform you as members, but also the public, to really explain how and why we regulate food in our 3 council areas. So Jason, moving on, thank you. So how we do that, as it says on the slide, is we ensure the quality of the food chain to minimise risk to human and animal health. So we're looking at farm to fork, okay? And we do this by conducting inspections, dealing with complaints, providing advice and guidance, taking part in sampling regimes, and of course, as we keep saying, we take enforcement action where that's necessary. So to give you a little bit of further scope around that, we currently have 6,875 registered food businesses across the SRS region. So we're certainly the biggest food service in Wales and one of the biggest in the UK. So to add to that, of course, SRS is unique in nature. We are special in that our demographics of the 3 local, obviously got Cardiff in the mix, which is a vibrant capital city where the churn of new businesses is very much a pressure for us. We approximate that we have around 55 new businesses a month. And of course, in Bridgend and the Vale, we've got some more rural farming community, particularly thinking of from the feed side of things. And of course, they are popular tourist destinations. So there's certain times of the year where visitors are heightened, and as such, we need to ensure that our visitors are visiting safe food establishments. So moving on to the next slide. You've seen this before. We keep putting this infographic in front of you because, of course, this is the Food Standards Agency recovery plan and the milestones that we are currently working towards. So in normal times, what we do is that we look at a planned programme for food hygiene interventions, which is based on the requirements of the Code of Practice and the associated guidance. So following an inspection, all food businesses are risk rated from category A, which is the highest risk, to category E, and a suitable intervention is required in accordance with our risk rating. So inspections of these premises are required at a prescribed frequency. We only determine that based on what we find. And as I said, category A requires an inspection once every 6 months, and then category B once a year, category C at 18-month intervals. So you can see how things go. When an inspection is completed as an intervention, a risk assessment is made by the officer, and the findings are then placed into a scoring system, and a food hygiene rating is awarded, so the scores on the doors. So each inspection, dependent on what we find, a bit like an MOT, it's an assessment of that time, will result in some movement of the food businesses between the different risk categories. If we've seen some improved performance, they could move to a lower risk categories, and likewise the other way around. But for now, as I said, we follow this FSA recovery plan and working truly on the milestones, and that's what we're working towards. So a little bit out of the ordinary. I highlighted earlier when it came to performance, up until now, we were able to reach each milestone, but our category C's, where we've got a very high volume of premises, is going to cause us an issue. And as such, we'll continue to have those conversations with the Food Standards Agency to talk them through where we are, how we're doing, and keep them really apprised as to our risk-based approach in terms of completing those. So moving on to the next slide. And I apologise in advance because, of course, I know we're approaching lunchtime, and I'm providing how now that we're going out and doing more inspections, we're finding areas of non-compliance. Isn't necessarily unusual, but it's certainly to what we're used to. Okay, so 2 photographs there in front. These are 2 cases which I've been meeting officers in relation to over the last 2 weeks to make decisions as to where we're going to go on things. But I wanted to highlight that each inspection, bearing in mind, I've told you we've got over 6,500 food businesses. It's not a case where, and once an officer does an inspection, that's the work completed. Certainly where we get non-compliances of this nature, there is a stream of work that goes on behind the scenes to, number one, achieve compliance, and more importantly, what we're really there for is to protect public health. So the photograph on the left with the cat on the chopping board, not what you want to see in a food premise. That relates to a premise which South Wales Police brought to our attention. And we conducted a joint inspection there. The premises were advertising some karaoke along with a buffet, which sounds lovely until you see this picture and realise that obviously the practices going on in those kitchens were absolutely horrendous. So not only have you got animals there sitting on a chopping board, and we all know how cats go to the toilet. The grime and the mess that sits around it, the officers described to me, was one of the worst that they've seen. Now, normally, and more often than, where we have non-compliances and there's a need to close, and that's where we identify that there's an imminent risk to health, the food business operator works with us and we do what we call a voluntary closure. So we close the premises, they agree to close, they're working on things in the background, and we then authorise them to reopen. In this case, the food business couldn't see the issues that were being. We were at the Magistrates Court obtaining a hygiene emergency prohibition order to get the court to order that premise to close. After that, then we monitor that premise to make sure that they remain closed. And of course, they don't reopen until the standards have significantly improved and we are satisfied. So again, just highlighting, that's one inspection and all that work going on in the background. And of course, the worry for us of how many people have eaten at that premises when those standards are there. So the photograph on the right, again, apologies, not very nice, but it's really important that you see the graphics, which truly, a picture paints, gives you 1,000 words, isn't it? It really describes what's going on there. So this was a new business, clearly with a rodent infestation. So they knew it was there. From the outside looking in, also it was a cafe type restaurant, and front of house seemed lovely. Behind the scenes, a rodent infestation is going on. They'd made some attempts in terms of they'd put sticky boards down to try and catch the rats then in this case, but of course didn't undertake the checks to see what the sticky boards were catching. So what you've got there is 2 rats caught on a sticky board, decomposing, and maggots coming out as a result. Okay, so this premise did work with us and they did close voluntarily. But again, there's all the work going on then in the background to ensure compliance before these people can open again. Of course, they'd be issued with a 0 food hygiene rating as a result as well. But we are, as I said, we're seeing this as a more frequent thing for us. We're seeing lots of these coming in. I've had others in relation to cockroaches and mice this week as well. So I just want to highlight to you that things are of course more prominent to us in terms of enforcement. I also need to say that the majority of the food businesses in our area are of very, very high standard. I'm showing you some, not nice cases, of course, for you to understand what's going on. So, as I said, cost of living also bears in mind for us. We know that is going to put food businesses under real pressure. Councillor Cipriano, you said about people turning their fridges off, the risk there in terms of food being kept out of temperature control and risks of people becoming ill as a result. So we need to be on guard and really aware of these things and getting officers to pick those up on inspection. So Jace, if I could ask you just to move to the next slide for me. Now, part of the requirement of writing the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan is to talk about resource. And looking at the programme, we need to identify, and it's based on sort of normal activity. Do we have enough resource to fulfil the full requirements of the programme? So we are telling you in our plan that we know that we are, with all the vacancies filled, with no sickness, no maternity leave, or any of the other reasons why that we have absences, we know there's a shortfall of 7.5 full-time equivalents. Okay, so we knew that coming into SRS. And of course, our role is really to do everything from a risk-based approach, put our resources in the right area. But I'm very conscious that 7.5 people is in essence another team of people that we really need to do this fully in accordance with the code. And again, conscious of budget discussions coming up. And I think it's my role as an OM to highlight to you that this service is a very, very leanly resourced, and we need to think about that going forward with budget requirements, in that any lesser staff conducting food inspections or going in the food service would be a real risk to us as an authority. So I am satisfied, however, I've got every confidence that the officers that we have do quality inspections. And there is a risk with food that the numbers of inspections drive the sort of momentum really in terms of the work that's carried out. Whereas for me, it's about every time they do an inspection, it matters. They pick up everything that's needed to be picked up. And of course, they pick up any non-compliances or any risks to public health. So we've got some really talented food officers who really care about the work that they do. And again, we do lots of monitoring in terms of inspection. So I'm confident that what we are doing out there, it is of really, really good standard. So Jace, if I could ask you to move on to the next slide. Now this, unfortunately, is when things go really, really wrong in the food service. And again, it's my role as the OM in charge of this area to raise this with you. So all of you will be aware of the E. coli outbreak that happened in 2005. So the photograph in front of you is Mason Jones, the 5-year-old little boy who died after eating contaminated meat at a school. So the infected meat which killed Mason Jones came from Tudor Butchers in Bridgend, which also supplied more than 40 other schools in the South Wales valleys, and around 160 people fell ill during that E. coli outbreak. Now that outbreak and the inspections that were carried out by officers. Obviously, this was pre-SRS, led to a public inquiry. And lots of lessons were learnt in terms of the way in which the inspections were carried out, but also the equipment used and some further guidance was issued, the E. coli guidance as a result of that. I'm hoping that I'm not scaring people by putting this slide in front of you, but again, I want to demonstrate to you the risks of the food chain and where practices are very, very poor and what can happen as a result. This is a high risk, fast paced service, and we need to be sure that, number one, that we're doing quality inspections, but also, as I said, that we're resourcing this in the right way. So part of the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan is to detail how we do things. But of course, our role in this committee is to make sure that we are confident and comfortable about the work that we're doing and how we're resourcing that as well. So I'm going to ask if there are any questions from members. As I said, this year is all about working towards the recovery plan and doing our best to reach those milestones, which we have up to date, and of course, reacting to those non-compliances that we are seeing. Helen and I will of course keep you all updated in terms with how we're doing on things. But the recommendations, as I said at the start, are to approve the Food and Feed Law Service Plan and of course authorise Helen as the head of SRS to make those editorial amendments. So I hope I've done some justice in terms of covering what the food service do, and of course just demonstrate the quite nasty issues that we're dealing with at the moment in terms of enforcement as well. So over to you to ask any questions in relation to the food service.
I mean, that was very good, Chris. I mean, very good in the sense your presentation was very good. The content, not always so good. Just one quick question I had. So, in terms of a shortfall of staff, the 7.5, is that a resource issue, or is that going back to recruitment? Because you'd never really, in terms of resources, could we ever have that number of staff? So is it a bit of both? Or
so that 7.5 takes into account any recruitment issue. So before we even start, we know we're 7.5 members of staff down to fully complete the code of practice. And I mean, some of the code of practice as well is the lower risk premises and the other interventions. And in an ideal world, we would absolutely be doing all those things. So what I'm trying to highlight is, with the recruitment and some repurposing of staff that has been happening as well as that 7.5 FTEs that we're down, we're even further down. So we really have an uphill challenge. Yeah. So, I'm very conscious that sometimes when we're presenting performance, you're seeing lots of red, and I want to put, reasons behind that as to why that is. It's not a case of staff are not performing. It's a case of we are understaffed. We're on an uphill struggle before we start. And as I said, very conscious that we're having budget discussions very soon, and just wanted to say how much of a high risk service the food service is before we even start those discussions. Yeah, no, understood. Do any other members have any questions? Because otherwise I'll move to Chris's recommendations on this, that we accept this report, and also for Helen to make any changes that are necessary, which aren't dramatic changes, obviously just editorial kind of changes. So we're all happy to accept those recommendations. Can somebody second that, please? That's seconded. Gareth, did you see?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that takes us to the end. There are no matters which I have urgent in part 1 or part 2. So it just remains me to thank you all for coming. Helen, thank you and the team for really thorough presentations and reports. And we'll see. When's our next meeting? Sorry.
That would be the December meeting, Chair.
December
meeting. Don't have the date off the top of my head, but it is towards the start of December, as I recall.
Yeah, brilliant. So I will see you in December. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
I know.
Thanks all.